this the right way? Like this. Guess it'll render it. Okay, so the topic, the title is The First Bank in the Bible, the creation of the stock market, something along those lines. And yeah, so this is like a topic. I didn't take notes, but I'm just going to be reading from um, from the parts of the story of Joseph that talk about the whole system of money and finance. So Joseph was made governor in Egypt. The word governor is used for governments, but the word governor in any government is not used for like the president. It's used for a certain person who is in charge of the finances of that government. And like in the story, Joseph himself was in charge of the finances and he was named the governor. And that government was based on his governance and his governance, particularly of finance. So I'm reading Genesis 37. Okay, so a certain man found him in the field. So Genesis 38 speaks about the time when Joseph is looking for his brothers. And his brothers are already, like, he's already told them his dream that everyone was bowing down to me and things like that. So the story of Joseph, first of all, teaches us that whatever dreams, hopes, and aspirations that we have, we need to apply them with wisdom. So he is walking to find them, and he's wearing a coat of many colors. And while he's doing this, he gets to a certain person who's like, "Oh, let's. Where are my brothers?" And then he tries to, and then he points them in the right direction. So he keeps on walking further and further, going to different places until he finds his brothers. So this is Genesis 37 from 23, and it came to pass Joseph came to his brethren that they stripped Joseph of his coat of many colors that was on him. They took him and cast him into a pit. The pit was empty. There was no water in it. The first understanding of finance and money and banking is going to be based on the notion of cash flow. The notion of cash flow is based on the notion of the Garden of Eden, where Adam had four rivers giving him providence. So even today, what we know as currency is a current of cash flow. Currency, currents, which is a cash flow. And I'm gonna go more into it because it explains the whole idea in Genesis. So it came to pass they stripped him and they put him in a pit. There was no water in it. There was no cash flow in it. There was no currency in it. Okay. So what you actually let me actually show you. The part Joseph came to his brethren. They stripped Joseph of his coat of many colors that was on him, and they took him and cast him into a pit, and it was empty. There was no water in it. So I'm just showing you for emphasis, because for a lot of people, uh, seeing is believing, like Thomas. So, so he went into this pit, right? And this is after they removed his coat. So this coat of many colors was supposed to give him a certain sparkle, a certain value, right? But then in this moment, it says that there was no water in this pit. So they sat down to eat bread, lifted up their eyes, looked, behold, a company of Ishmaelites. All right, I actually need to show you the pages because what happens in the creation of the first bank is actually kind of like very. I could say it's in a way it's finessed. It's it's like kind of hidden, but it's here. So I have a few notes, like one, two, three notes. Like I read a book about reading a book, and then in that book it just says like the book is How to Read a Book by I think it's Mortimer J. Adler, and in that book he expresses like when you read a book, it's always good to like actually highlight and take notes and emphasize the things that you see. So that's how I read my book, the Bible. So there's some notes. So I need you to just like look past that in the sense that I just want the story to flow as it is written, right? And not as I see it, right? So here we go. So it came to pass when Joseph that they so it says they sat down to eat bread. They lifted up their eyes to look, and behold, a company of Ishmaelites came from Gilead with their camels bearing spicy and balm to myrrh, going to carry it down to Egypt. Now Judah said unto his, this is Judah, the other one is Judas, said unto his brethren, what profit is it if we slay our brother and conceal his blood? Come, let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, after all, and our flesh. Come on, guys. And his brethren were content. So Judah was the one who's like, yeah, let's make money out of this. And then the brethren agreed. But it just goes to show that this Judah character had a lot of like ability to speak. All right. Then they passed by Midianites, merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph into Egypt. So what happened was that Joseph was in a very empty pit, and his brothers sat down to eat, break bread, have a good time. Then they're like, hey, but you know what? Why don't we just sell him and make money out of this? One of the brothers thought that. And then they're like, all right, cool. Now, in the text that I was just showing, we see that they're Ishmaelites, merchantmen. And then they have the Ishmaelites, they had spices, balm, myrrh going to Egypt, right? So these were the actual merchants. These were the actual like traders, basically, right? And Judah said unto his brethren, what profit is it if we slay our brothers? Let us sell them to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother and our flesh. Now, at the same time, there happened to be a group of people called Midianites, who were merchantmen. Okay? Now, when we look at the Ishmaelites, we see that they had spice, they had balm, they had this, they had that. But when we look at the Midianites, They're just there. Okay? Let me show you. Okay. So these are the Ishmaelites. The Ishmaelites had spice, balm, myrrh going to carry down to Egypt, right? And then that's when Judah got the idea. But they passed the Midianites, merchantmen, and they drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they, who are they, brought Joseph to Egypt, the Ishmaelites. So, the Midianites, these are in the middle of everything. I spoke about media in the Bible, and this is banking in the Bible. Now, when we look at money and banking, we realize that there is in the middle of all transactions is the the money or the paper money. Call it a currency. And this is a medium of exchange, the word referring to Midianite. So a lot of people never realize the role of the Midianites in anything, lest in this situation where they draw him out, just like how you withdraw money. There was no water in the pit. There was no transaction to be made, but they happened to be in the middle of this transaction, the Midianites, in the middle of anything. They are the power of Persia and Babylon. This is their power, the Midianites. The Midianites create media, this whole medium of exchange, which is what we call money. So they created money out of thin air by drawing it out of the pit. The money was for the traders were actually the Ishmaelites. Those were the ones who were going there. And Judah and his brothers were the ones who had the product. What do the Midianites have to do with it? They're the ones in the middle of each transaction. And this is literally how banking works, that they're in the middle of whatever transaction is happening. So the Midianites drawing them is how we draw the medium of exchange from any like pit, which is just to say from any pocket, from any wallet, from any source where we keep things. There was no water in it. There was no cash flow in it. But they created this cash flow by by drawing by drawing him out of the pit, just like how we withdraw. So what they were withdrawing from that pit, because the Ishmaelites are the traders, so what they were withdrawing from the pit was money, because this is why this is Genesis 37:28. They passed the Midianites merchantmen. They drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites. So the Midianites were just there to withdraw the money. The Midianites were there to withdraw, and they were the ones who conducted this transaction. They sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites. But the transaction was between Judah and his brothers and the Ishmaelites. The Midianites are just there in the middle of each transaction. So this is literally a snapshot of how banking works. Banking first fascinated me when I was in high school. I remember I was walking home talking to my friend, and we are just talking about money. And then we're like, you know what? The day we figure out how banks make money, we'll figure out everything, because they have all the money, and it seems like everyone else has all the money. And the reason we're going to school is to make all the money. So what is money? That was when I first got fascinated by it. But everything that has astounded me has not astounded me as much as the finding of the Midianites, who are just drawing money out of a pit, withdrawing money. Because for them, it's a transaction. They saw the Ishmaelites. So, like, this is Genesis chapter 37 from verse 23. They saw the Ishmaelites who had their goods, right, to do a service to go to Egypt. And they happened to be Midianites. But the Midianites ended up drawing and selling to the Ishmaelites, who took care of the transaction and distribution. But they, the Midianites, were just in the middle of this transaction. It's a very, very small, subtle application of the Midianites, but the writers of Genesis had to include the the action of the Midianites just drawing money out. So there are certain people in this world who just draw money. They're just certain people or certain actions that create an ability to just draw, to just withdraw, to just withdraw. And there was no water in the pit. It is emphasized here. There was no water in the pit. But the idea of it came, but then the execution of it happened because of the people in the middle of this transaction, the Midianites. So they conducted this transaction just in the same way like no one really knows what banks do. They create money out of thin air. They just draw it out. This is the same way that the Midianites, who are in the middle of each transaction, no one really knows what they do, but they're just drawing out money, selling it to the Ishmaelites. So this transaction is talking about selling. When did they buy it? The Midianites got the money, but when did they buy what they sold? They just sold it, right? This is what it says. It says that, and they passed Midianite merchantmen. They drew and lifted up Joseph out of the pit with draw. Drew and lifted. The word, all right. The word draw is very interesting because the word itself, when it's there are certain words called anagrams, which yeah, it's an anagram, or it's an anagram for the ward. So this like to draw to ward, um but let's stay on that topic. So they draw to just take out of thin air. So just like how you draw a picture, you just take it out of like your mind out of thin air and then you just draw it. And the Midianites seem to be able to do that because they like literally draw like money, like pictures, like a drawing of a like money. All money is like a drawing. Just draw it, just like how we draw a picture. But their ability was that they draw and lifted up Joseph out of the pit and sold Joseph to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver, and they brought Joseph to Egypt. So they're the ones who sold, right? And then we don't know exactly how much they got, but they're the ones who are selling and conducting this transaction for 20 pieces of silver. This does not happen with Judah. This happens with the Midianites. And then they're like, oh, okay, so we've sold, So this is very fascinating as a question that I've always had, like, how do banks function? As a question that I've always had. Like, everyone in the world needs money, like, as much as the love of it, because this is why we first spoke of emotional intelligence and emotional mastery, because the greatest emotion is love. So the love of money is the greatest problem, right? But the money itself is just being drawn out. There was no water, there was no cash flow, there was no current, there was no currency in that pit. But they were able to draw out this person in the form of a currency. So so that's the first part. That's the first part of the story of Joseph, right? And this is the first part of banking, which is the title of this video, the first bank. So this is the first bank in the Bible. But now what's interesting about it is the paradox that they were selling something to the Ishmaelites that they drew out, but they didn't own it, right? But they just drew it out, and from there they conducted their transaction and they were making money, right? And then they went on their way because they're merchantmen. But then their mercantilism, what are they like? We see what the Ishmaelites sell and what they do, but the Midianites, to me, this is the most fascinating group of people after the Jews and the Hebrews, obviously, in the Bible, after the Israelites, like the Medes, the way that they're so elegantly put all over the Bible, and their stories are always fascinating. And I have some videos about it, which is about the media, the creation of media, because God Himself creates media. But the Midianites, so God Himself, like this is like when you hear about them selling Joseph from the pit, you hear about silver, and you hear about Judas selling out Jesus, you hear about silver. But when we talk about God, you hear about gold, the crowns, the gold, like He put the gold. But where does silver, like gold, like all of those things that are like that make the world go round? Very few people really understand them. And it's at the end of the day not anyone's fault, but we're the ones through lack of understanding who will suffer for that lack of my people perish from a lack of knowledge. So this lack of knowledge, especially when it comes to money, because there's the reason why emotional intelligence is in the Bible is because through the emotions that we have around money, this is what governs it. This is what like destroys it or makes it. Like you could hear people like Tony Robbins and like Jim Rohn, whatever motivational speaker speaks, like they're always talking about mindset. Napoleon Hill, think, grow rich. Those things are great of how that is to be conducted. And the person who really exemplified what it means to have this meditation, this success, this prosperity is, I mean, Joseph, definitely, but it's also Jacob. It's also Jacob who who takes over from Moses. He exemplifies what is actually like necessary in order to have the emotional diligence, the emotional discipline. And this is why like I start to speak about this and these other things in regard from like the basis of emotional mastery, because the love of money is the root of all evil, and love is an emotion. So we need to master that emotion so that we do not become like the rich young ruler. He thought that like, because like how do you not listen to Jesus? Like you're saying with Jesus, how do I become a follower of you? And you ask Jesus, and Jesus is like, oh, okay, cool. I'm not saying money is bad, but for you in particular, just give away all your money and just come closer to me. And he's like, no. So he denied Christ, you know? So, in the sense that you do get all of the wealth and all of the money, you need to be sensitive to hear what God wants you to do it, how He wants you to direct that money, because it's a cash flow, and this flow is always flowing. But in the beginning, there was no water in the pit, but the Midianites were able to draw it out. They were able to draw it out, right? So that's the first part. And I've just spoken about the creation of that bank, right? Which is the Midianites in the middle of this transaction, right? So now I'm just going to talk about the creation of the stock market. Stock market. Stock market. Okay, I was reading from Genesis 37. And what happens after this is like the story of Joseph. Like his story is very fascinating. Okay, But what happens after this now is that Joseph is now sold because of this transaction. The merchants and the traders made this transaction happen. He goes to Egypt. He goes, and then he's just highly favored by God. He's so valuable in the eyes of God. Like everything he does, he prospers. And even his blessing is so bountiful. Like the bow of like Joseph is like fruitful branch, like just keeps on. Like the story of Joseph is a story of abundance. This is why it's a story of wealth, money, banking. This is what it is. He's actually in a position where he is in charge of the abundance of Egypt and of this. Like the Ishmaelites are going to Egypt. Everyone's going to Egypt. Egypt is like the center of all of the economies, because what they're telling us was that the Ishmaelites had economic goods, and they also were people with financial services, which were the Midianites, who just draw him out, right? Just draw him out and make money in the process, right? So at the end of the day, Joseph is put into another pit, which is a prison. And while he's in this prison, certain two people have dreams, and then he interprets the dreams. We'll talk again about Joseph when we talk about dreams, because there are a lot of themes in the story. So these people, but here we're going to touch on it. So these people have dreams, and then one of them is released, and then Joseph is like, please, please, please make sure that you tell the Pharaoh about me. And then it happens that the guy leaves, and then he doesn't remember to tell the Pharaoh about Joseph, because he's like, hey, I've been stuck in this pit, like I need to get out. I'm in this prison. Like just tell him. But then in those 2 years, he's just like forgotten. No one hears about Joseph. No one talks about him or to him about what happened. But that's just what happens, right? So as we go into the creation of this wealth system, right, we just want to first of all just like internalize and acknowledge the fact that you might have been working for years or months or days or weeks, whatever, however long it is, right? And the result will come at the right time. So I'm gonna share my screen with you again, and then we're gonna read the next part of the story. So this is still Genesis, right? And then I'm in chapter 41. And it came to pass at the end of 2 full years that Pharaoh dreamed, and behold, he stood by a river. And behold, they came up out of the river 7 well-favored kine and fat-fleshed, and they fed in the meadow, and behold, several other kine. So this is cattle, were upon them out of the river, ill-favored and lean-fleshed, and stood by the by one by the other kine upon the brink of the river. Right. So notice these cattle, kine, right? They're standing at the brink of the river, and the ill-favored lean-fleshed cattle did eat kine did eat 7 well-favored and fat kine. So Pharaoh awoke, he slept and dreamed a second time. Behold, 7 ears of corn, right? This is grain, came up upon the stalk, and rank and good. Okay, and behold, 7 ears blasted in the east wind sprang up after them. 7 thin ears devoured the 7 rank and full ears. And Pharaoh awoke, behold, it was a dream. And it came to pass in the morning, his spirit was troubled, and he sent and called for all the magicians of Egypt and all the wise men thereof. And Pharaoh told them his dream. And there was none that could interpret them unto Pharaoh. And spake the chief butler unto Pharaoh, saying, I do remember my faults this day. Pharaoh was wroth with his servant, and put me inward in the captain's guardhouse, both me and the chief baker, and we dreamed a dream in one night, I and he. We dreamed each man according to the interpretation of his dream, And there was there with us a young man in Hebrew, a servant to the captain of the guard. And we told him, he interpreted us our dreams, and each man according to his dream did he interpret. It came to pass, he interpreted to us. So it was, he restored to my office, and him he hanged. Then Pharaoh sent and called Joseph. They brought him hastily out of the dungeon. He shaved himself, changed his raiment, came in into Pharaoh. Pharaoh said unto Joseph, I have dreamed a dream, and there is none that can interpret it. I have heard say of thee that you can understand a dream to interpret it. And Joseph answered Pharaoh, saying, It is not me. God shall give Pharaoh an answer of peace. And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, In my dream, behold, I stood upon the bank of a river. And right there, the bank directs cash flow or currency or currents. When we first spoke about the bank, we were hearing of this pit where the Midianites withdraw Joseph and then they sell him for cash flow. So now we're hearing the interpretation. Pharaoh said unto Joseph, right? And Pharaoh said unto Joseph, In my dream, behold, I stood upon the bank of a river, right? Behold, they came out of the river 7 kine, which is cattle, fat-fleshed and well-favored, and they fed in a meadow, and behold, 7 other kine came up after them, poor, very ill, and favored, such that I never saw in the land of Egypt for badness. Because Egypt, like, anyone can just research like the glory of Egypt and like understand the magnitude. The lean and the ill-flavored kine did eat up the first fat cattle, and when they had eaten them up, it could not be known that they had eaten them, but they were still ill-favored, as it is at the beginning. So I awoke, and I saw my dream, and behold, 7 ears came up of one stalk, full and good. So this stalk right here, okay, this is where we get the word stock, S-T-O-C-K. Okay, so this is us seeing this this institution. And behold, 7 ears withered, thin and blasted, and the east wind sprung up after them, and the thin ears devoured all the 7 good ears. And I told this unto the magicians, but there was none that could declare it to me. So none of them could understand it. Now, and Joseph said unto Pharaoh, The dream of Pharaoh is one. The word one is important. God has showed Pharaoh that what he is about to do, the 7 good cattle, all right, the 7 good cattle are 7 years, and the 7 good ears are 7 years. The dream is one, and the 7 thin, ill-favored cattle that came up after them are 7 years, and 7 empty ears blasted with the east wind shall be 7 years of famine. This is the thing which I have spoken unto Pharaoh. What God is about to show unto Pharaoh, behold, they come 7 years. So now this is the explanation. Behold, they come 7 years of great plenty throughout all the land of Egypt, and they shall arise after them 7 years of famine. And all the plenty shall be forgotten in the land of Egypt, and the famine shall consume the land, and the plenty shall not be known in the land by reason of that famine following, for it shall be very grievous. And for that the dream was doubled unto Pharaoh twice. It is because the thing is, it is established by God, and God will shortly bring it to pass. So just keep this in mind. The dream is doubled twice. Now therefore let Pharaoh look out a man discreet and wise, and set him over the land of Egypt. So this is a very wise statement, because no one else could interpret this, and then he says, now Pharaoh, look for someone discreet and wise. All of his wise and discreet men could not, right? So he's the only option. So this is a very interesting statement. Let Pharaoh do this, and let him appoint officers in the land, and take the fifth part of the land of Egypt in the 7 plenteous years, and let them gather all the food of those good years that come, and lay up corn under the hand of Pharaoh, and let them keep food in the cities, and that food shall be for store to the land against 7 years of famine, and which shall be in the land of Egypt, and in that the land perish not through the famine. Okay, all right. So that was a lot of reading, right? But this was interpreting the dream. So the first thing is that the dream was happened twice, okay, and then in the interpretation, Joseph said the dream is one, even though it happened twice. So in the dream, what happened was that Pharaoh had the dream the first time and he had it the second time, but this dream is the same dream. In this same dream, it is expressing how when two or more agree. So this is when you have a dream, right? When the dream keeps on coming, you have to pay attention to it, because those dreams that can reoccur, they're literally usually one dream. Okay. So I just read chapter 41, and my battery is low. So just give me a second. I'm just going to change locations, and then I'm going to finish off explaining what I just read in the interpretation of the wealth principles that Joseph was in charge of, according to the Bible, right? So just give me a second and then we'll continue this. Oh, right. Right. So as we continue on, just need to make sure that I will finish like this discussion, and then I can be about some, yeah. So I just needed to make sure that the charge was charging well, and now I'm just getting settled in. So just recalling what I just came from reading, it is the story of the dreams of Pharaoh. All right. So he had two dreams, but the two dreams were interpreted as one dream. And let me just see. Let me just see. Okay. Thank you for the comments. No man can serve two masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will hold the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and Mammon. Laquita and Grand Rising from Marjorie Douglas. Right. So yeah, this is a true thing. And in the beginning, I was expressing how I first started off this this whole discussion with two previous live streams, and they were all expressing emotional mastery. And in that verse, it talks about emotion of hate and emotion of love. Like you hate one, love the other. So that is the type of emotional disimbalance that we have. Money is always called it legal tender. And the word tender means something that is like, tender, misunderstood. And in a lot of the cases, people just think it's just better to ignore it. But if we ignore it, and at the same time, a good man leaves wealth for generations, not for his children, but for even his children's children. So that you cannot do without money or wealth in the actual sense. But the notion of that everything should revolve around money is a notion of the world. But the word gives gold in the garden. When God created the garden, he said to Adam, there is gold in Havilah, and that gold is good. So that goodness is what we want to explore. We don't want to explore the goodness of the badness. We want to explore the goodness of godliness. And the wise are crowned by wealth, right? So there's a lot of misconceptions with money, but one of them comes from this. What proverb is it? It says that why do you? It says be discerning enough to stop chasing after money, because you should not set your sight on things that do not exist, because once you set your sights on money, it grows wings and flies away. So you can just Google that. I'm forgetting which exact proverb it is. If I think hard, I'll remember it. But then if I think hard, I might lose my train of thought. I want to think easy. So right now I'm thinking easy. So the most complicated institution of money is the stock market, the stock exchange. And here, what we're actually seeing is when you say you have, right, the stock market is actually based on people who used to have livestock, and then they used to trade that, right? And then it is also based on the actual stocks and grains that people used to exchange, right? So when we hear the dream of Pharaoh, I went through reading it because, when you read stuff about money, there's always a lot to read, right? So the dream of Pharaoh is that he has kine or cattle. And the word cattle, when we look at etymology, the root word for capital, it is actually cattle, right? Or they used to call it chattel. Then it was it was from cattle to chattel to capital. So all of the capital markets revolve around cattle. So when Pharaoh is having this dream, he's dreaming about the capital, the wealth, the resources of Egypt. Now, Egypt was the greatest land at the time, just like how America or China is, right? Or China will be. Or might be, but then, or Africa, like how Africa, imagine all of the resources of Africa being utilized with someone with some discernment. So the Pharaoh had that discernment, enough discernment to place Joseph in charge. But then he's having this dream about cattle. Now, cattle is capital, especially since this is Africa. Egypt is in Africa. So, especially in the African understanding, we all know like the value of cattle. So, this is capital. So, he's dreaming about the capital of this land. This land at this moment, it is like the one that is making everything flourish around the world. The Ishmaelites who we're reading about, they're going to Egypt to make a fortune. Like if you're gonna sell somebody, you have to sell them to Egypt. So everyone knew this. Even Judah, when he saw the Ishmaelites, like, yeah, we can make money through like this transaction, right? So first, he's dealing with the capital, which is the chattel, which is in the form of the kine or the cattle. The second part of it, he's dealing with the grains, the corn, the stalks, like the storehouse. So this is what we actually get from the land, we get from the earth. We like get our substance or sustenance from everything that is in the land. And then this is also part of what the first capital markets were there for. So if someone had cattle, they have a certain form of capital. And if also someone has like any form of grains, in this case it's corn, if they have that, they also have a form of like currency of which they could transact and then they could exchange, like, oh, you have rice, I have. So this was the whole barter system. And this is the way that the first stocks, right, were actually exchanged, because someone is going to be growing corn and another person going to be growing rice. So now we have the necessity to exchange it. So in this dream is expressed with Pharaoh standing at the riverbank. So I just read it, right? I'm not going to read it again. And then he's standing at a bank, and the bank is the actual institution. Like we have institutionalized it, but in this moment, it was what was directing this flow, which was leading to the cattle growing, the corn growing, the stalks growing. It was at this place where he could see the cycles of the rising and the falling markets. This is what was going to happen. So when you actually look at the economic cycles, they are actually expressed in these, they call them the boom and bust system. But in this situation, it was speaking about a certain period of time, and which is also interesting. It's also interesting that the market operators, like the people who describe and discern the market flows, economists basically, when they have these economic metrics, they always like say that there's a cycle that happens like generally within 6 to 9 years, like 6 to 8 years. Basically, like some say it's 8 years, some say it's 6 years. In this moment, it's 7 years. This is the cycle. So this cycle usually always repeats itself. And well, for more on that, I'm not gonna. That is actually some other stuff that's like maybe like more fascinating for certain individuals who just like want to know like how does they actually work, when is the next cycle, and things like that. But then basically there was gonna be a cycle of like a boom, and then there was gonna be a bust, and then Joseph was able to interpret it for the Pharaoh. And this was going to affect the banks. It was going to affect the cattle, which is the capital. It was also going to affect the stocks, which is the stock market. So the stocks, meaning that the cattle need to eat this corn, right? This is why the cattle are eating cattle and things like that. But the cattle are fed by this. But this is all directed by this water. And when we first read, there was no water in the pit, but the Midianites came and drew it out. They withdrew the money, the cash flow started flowing. So, in this situation, what we're seeing is the description of what we would say is like a capital market, right? Capital intensive. And the capital in this market is based on the understanding of the cycles. And we know that there is nothing new under the sun, right? But there's seasons. But we know that each day there will be like we can't predict anything, but we can predict that the sun will rise and the sun will set. We can also predict seasons, and we can also predict cycles. So this was an understanding of cycles, whether they be business cycles or just natural cycles. These were the cycles that Joseph expressed to him. And then so yeah, so basically, I'll end it like here with this point here. So after this, Joseph is appointed to be governor, right? He's given officers, and then what else is there? All right, if there's something else that I would, yeah, there is more to the story of Joseph, but we'll talk more about it. But he's made governor, and then now just to wrap it up, like I just want to wrap it up with this point, is to say what we can learn personally for our personal finances in the story of the creation of the first bank, which is how they actually banked on the Midianites. However, the Midianites, to me, I say that they're very fascinating, but they're like really very antagonistic characters within the Bible. When we talk about the creation of media, it's because of the Midianites. And when we talk about the creation of the bank, it is because of the Midianites. And what they were doing was like no one really knows how they did what they did, but they were able to draw money out. And then after this, Joseph was put in a position where he is now governing the wealth of nations. And he's doing this with wisdom. And what I like most about Joseph is like when we read chapter 41, it says, "It came to pass at the end of 2 full years." The first thing he did is not try to like convince the Pharaoh that he's a hot shot. The first thing he did is to say, God is going to reveal Pharaoh's dream. And this is the attitude, the integrity we must have. Like, even after 2 full years, you could be trying to do something. Just know that God can reveal it, God can do it, God is with you no matter what. Those were his first words. Imagine you're coming out of the pit. If it's been years and years, like you're coming out of this dungeon, and then you know that you're seeing the king of the world, right? And then the first thing you do is not try to appease him, is not try to like make yourself like, hey, you need me. But the first thing he does is say, no, God is the one who's going to reveal this. So this certain level of emotional discipline, I don't know what it is, but this level of integrity is amazing. Banks always pride themselves with words like integrity. Like they want to be like this thing that is this institution that has lived for so many years. This is how they actually want to sell themselves. But they want to do it in the spirit of like that, like integrity. But if anything, is stands out to me in the story of Joseph, it is his integrity. He had so much integrity that he didn't sleep with the Potiphar's wife. He didn't sleep with that like everything he did was with so much integrity, and his words when he spoke to Pharaoh showed so much integrity. That's the first thing he says after 2 full years. Like, I can't imagine that. Like, I can't. But then that is how we should think in order to be able to govern or to be stewards of God's wealth. Because his story also reminds me of Abraham. Like, he had a lot. He was very, very rich. Lot had a lot too. But there were stewards of wealth. Abraham was able to steward certain wealth to Melchizedek, which reverberated into the book of Hebrews in the New Testament. They still talk about how he was a good steward of wealth. So this story is speaking about how we supposed to lend to nations. This is what it says in Deuteronomy 28. It's a long chapter, right? But then here they use this word in Genesis. They say, gather food and lay up the corn in the land, let them keep food in the cities. And the food, this is Genesis 41:36. And that food shall be for store. So this store is a certain shop, and the store, the way it's stored, the storage, it's a whole story. And the store, like it shall be for store. There's a video, or maybe one or two, about the shop of a bishop, or the store of the apostle. All right, it's a whole thing, which is to like bring to life what each person has in store. When we say like you have these treasures like in jars, you the jars of clay storing treasure. So this is what we need to be a steward of. This is what it's actually speaking of. And this is what God banks on. Because he's like, we are the ones who depend on him. We believe in him. We bank on him. But then he has stored something within us. And this is the understanding of the the slave who was given talents and he just stored it, and the other ones restored it, right? And this is the story. So this story comes here that we need to be stewards of God's wealth. What is stored within us should not just be, it's not a storeroom, but then this was to be given out so that we can save nations. This is why it says in Deuteronomy that I was referring to, that we have to be lending to nations. And how do you do that if you don't have anything in store? How do you do that if you don't have any money, any wealth? This is the promise of the Hebrews. This is why it's speaking about, I saw this Hebrew in jail. He said this and this, the Hebrew. So this is the Hebrew understanding, the Jewish understanding, that whatever we say among ourselves, we see that there's certain people who call themselves like the richest people, and they're of the Ashkenazi Jews, right? And then they actually have the banks. All of the banks in the world are owned by them because they understand the story. But the story is just about drawing it out, just drawing it out. So, from what is stored within you, what can you draw out? And this is what you need to understand, that this is the Midianite understanding, because we have to vex the Midianites. We'll talk more about the Midianites, but they're the ones who create the first bank. But this exchange, this bank where Pharaoh is standing, is directed by God. And God is the one who says, open up and I will fill your storehouse. This is the store. And the story of Joseph is expressing this wealth that everyone going to work, everyone going to school is so that we can store some money, right? But we don't really understand this world of money. So the way that it was created, why was it created? People don't understand this. And the reason why the stock market exists, like it is called, this is something like like someone, if someone like hears it, it might just be like whoosh, you know. But if someone who has understanding can understand this, then they'll understand this. All right, so I'll tell you, and then this will be the last thing, right? But the reason why the stock market is created is as a risk management mechanism. It was created in different places at different times, and the oldest one that we can just generally reference is, let's just reference the exchange in Japan. That one was through the grains of rice. They used to exchange that, right? But what used to happen was you wouldn't know because of the seasons again, right? You wouldn't know if if God is gonna make more rain next season or not. So they would create a mechanism whereby they could sell or buy something in the next season. They'll, all right, fine, I already have 1,000 right now. So let me just buy it for the next season. And then I will not have the risk of uncertainty, the risk of not knowing, like, is it going to be a good harvest or not, right? This risk mechanism is how capital markets generated international trade. So when you look at the Ishmaelites, they're going to Egypt, the Midianites were going somewhere else, and then the other people were in other places. But international trade had these risks, and then the mechanism to manage the risk was the stock market. So here, Joseph is telling Pharaoh, like, you need to manage the risk. Like right now, we have so much, we're having good times, right? So look into yourself as well. Like, even if you're having the best of times, store something, put something in store. This is the story, right? What are you going to store? If you're having the bad times, they won't be as bad because you've already stored something, you've already managed your risk. So there is no risk financially, emotionally, or whatever. But there was a huge risk. That's why people had to travel to Egypt because they were gonna die. The brothers of Joseph thought they were literally gonna die. They're like, we saw this strange Egyptian. We don't understand him, but we can't go back there or we're gonna die. And the father Jacob is like, no, you will die if you stay here. So they had not really managed the risk, But this govern the mind. The way the integrity of Joseph governed his mind is the way he was able to govern the government of Egypt in order to have this like integrity that he just carried on in his whole life. But through that, he was able to save other people. He was lending to other nations. He was the one who stored everything and managed the risk of people starving. And this is the story because he was able to store. So we are part of God's storehouse. More of the storehouse. You can watch the video on the shop of a bishop. It has more about that. So, so I've just gone over this, and then I did say I'll stop here, because that when I start talking about money, it's such a fascinating topic. Fine, I'll say one more thing, because here it says the money, right? I did mention it, right? Because money has M1Y, MONEY, one. And here, money, when you say it, sounds like money, many. Everyone, if you have one money, it's not enough. You need many money. And this is why Joseph is saying the dream is one, even though the dream is many. So I'll stop there. But then money is such a like a vexing topic. But after this, like you cannot be vexed anymore because even the whole information about what the stock market is, a lot of people don't know that. And a lot of people will never know it. And a lot of people will always be perplexed by it. But now that you know, this is how you manage risk. And this is how actual, like this story, this is how it was used to manage the risk. Like store all of the stocks, store all of the grains, store all of the cattle. They were storing all of the capital so that in the bad times they would have the excess, the lots and lots and lots of wealth that they had in the good times. So whatever cycle you're in, if you're in a boom, if you're in a bust, just make sure that you have the integrity or the consciousness of mind. This is why we started with emotional intelligence, emotional mastery. When you have this, just like Joseph, in 2 years he was developing this emotional mastery. When he went to Pharaoh, he was not emotional, he was just like on point. So when you have this on pointness like Joseph, then whatever you store like will be increased and there won't be any risk. You will manage everything better with that type of governance in your house, in your household. This is why the virtuous woman actually uses money. She has ships coming to her. That's money, right? But at the same time, people are very, very emotional about money. They're scared about money because of certain verses like, oh, it is easier for a camel to go through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to enter heaven. That's true. Because you know how many billionaires there are in the world? About 3,000. You can name them literally. And those are what we call rich men, right? And those rich men can change anything right now like that. But they don't. And I feel like that refers to those people with that amount of wealth at that level, right? That's what I'm saying. Like that also could just be like someone else, like they won't even know. But 7 billion people on Earth, 8 billion, right? And then 3,000 billionaires. Those are the people, like, is it their wealth or is it the is it like they're able to do so much, but they won't? So I feel like that, in reference to having so much wealth, should just put the fear of God to say that if we do have that wealth, let us be stewards of the wealth. Let us not just store it for ourselves, but a blessing is upon the person who sells the grain. There's a proverb that says that it's an actual blessing, right? So thank you for joining me in this discussion. And Any questions, you can just write the comments, and then I will do my best to like respond. And but then I will have more to say about this topic, maybe even other topics that are in reference to this, because money is important, but a lot of people like are so emotional about it. Tender is a tender topic, but there's certain people who are like losing their lives because they don't have money. And it should be so easy to make money because they just draw it out. But it's not so easy. So I do understand that. But the first key to unlocking this is to really have the emotional mastery, not to love money, not to love money. Love God, love His words, and He will give you the gold because it belongs to Him, the gold and the silver. Thank you so much. So I'll see you later.